country's most notorious gang leaders, Brian Rattigan has already spent the past 2 decades in prison. The 39-year-old's conviction for murder was overturned last year, and he pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Declan Gavin, whose death sparked a murderous inter-gang feud. Rattigan stabbed Gavin, a rival gang leader, outside the Abracadabra fast food restaurant in Crumlin on the 25th of August 2001. His fingerprints were found next to the victim's blood on the door through which he had tried to chase him. Brian Rattigan was arrested a month after the murder and has been in prison ever since for a variety of other offences. However, inside he remained a gang leader. He became the first person convicted of dealing drugs from inside prison, and for that was sentenced to another 17 years. Brian Rattigan's plea to manslaughter was the first time he admitted he had killed Declan Gavin. He also apologised to the Gavin family and wrote to the victim's mother, saying he had regretted that night in silence ever since. However, Mr Justice Michael White said today the apology had come too late to be a mitigating factor, and he sentenced Rattigan to another 9 years in prison, to date from his guilty plea on the 1st of October last. Paul Reynolds, RTE News, the Central Criminal Court.
An Oireachtas committee has heard that there will be significant changes in how trade is conducted if there is a no-deal Brexit. Replying to a question, the chairman of the Revenue Commissioners, Niall Cody, said claims by UK Brexiteers that things will go on as normal in a no-deal scenario were not correct. Alva Keneally of our political staff.
With just over 60 days to Brexit, members of the Finance Committee have been exploring Ireland's customs and revenue preparations with the chairman of the Revenue Commissioners, Niall Cody. Mr Cody noted that the Irish government had made clear that its overriding objective was to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, and he said revenue was not planning for customs posts. Asked if Brexiteers were right that things would go on as normal in a no-deal scenario, Mr Cody said they were not right. He said there would be significant changes, and Revenue was seeking to manage the implications and facilitation of legitimate trade. Sinn Féin's finance spokesperson Piers Doherty sought an assurance from the head of Revenue that his officials would not participate in checks on the border regardless of the outcome in the Brexit negotiations. Mr Cody said he couldn't go before the Oireachtas Finance Committee and rule something out forever, adding that it was not in his authority. Alva Keneally, RTE News, Leinster House.
The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has appealed for dialogue in Venezuela to avoid the country's political crisis spiralling out of control. The European Commission has called for a political process leading to new elections. Yesterday, the opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president, with the move backed by the US President Donald Trump and several other countries. Russia has reaffirmed its support for Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro and warned the US against military intervention. The former Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond has been arrested by police. Police Scotland confirmed that a 64-year-old man had been charged and said a report would be sent to prosecutors. No further details of the charge have been released. Our London correspondent Fiona Mitchell.
A statement from Police Scotland earlier today said that a 64-year-old man had been arrested and charged, and a report sent to the Procurator Fiscal, which is Scotland's public prosecutor. Alex Salmond led the devolved Scottish Government between 2007 and 2014. 2 weeks ago, Mr Salmond won a case against the Scottish Government when it conceded that an internal investigation against him had been flawed. The investigation followed complaints of sexual harassment, which Mr Salmond denies. Police had also been investigating those complaints, but it is not known if today's charges are related, as the charge details have not yet been released. Mr Salmond is expected to appear in court later today. Fiona Mitchell, RTE News, London.
Now the time is coming up to 6 minutes past 1.
RTE Radio 1 weather with ESB Networks. Never approach or touch fallen electricity wires. For emergencies, call 1850 372 999. Stay safe, stay clear.
Mostly cloudy for the rest of the day with scattered patches of drizzle or light rain, these mainly on hills and near coasts. There will be extensive hill mist with fog near some coasts, becoming milder with highest temperatures 9 to 11 degrees by evening. Anya.
Brian, thank you. And still to come on the news at 1, the 9-year jail sentence for Brian Rattigan over a Dublin gangland feud murder. Another WLRI over another cervical check controversy. We'll hear about that and discuss the facts that have been made public so far with Business Post Deputy Editor Susan Mitchell. Not a marriage nor engagement, but a partnership. Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin joins us from Belfast to talk about his party's new relationship with the SDLP. Cork City gets bigger, Leo in Davos, and how the financial ombudsman protects consumers. Ger Deering will join us to talk about that in studio. You can hear him and all those other stories coming up on the news at 1 after this break.
Green Book is being hailed as one of the best films of the decade.
I'm a black musician about to embark on a tour in the Deep South.
You and the Deep South, there's going to be problems.
Nominated for 4 BAFTAs, including Best Film.
You never win with violence.
I didn't like the way he was treating you.
And winner of 3 Golden Globes, including Best Picture.
It takes courage to change people's hearts.
Critics are calling it remarkable, powerful, and superbly entertaining.
It's amazing you said that.
Inspired by a true friendship. Green Book, in cinemas January 30th, certificate 12A.
Filma Mansfield talks about matching. Life is all about relationships.
Some of the witnesses, even after being served with witness orders, had to be arrested and brought before the court. So there were several difficulties that it posed, but we dealt with it within the Garda organisation by arresting our own witnesses and bringing them to court for them to give evidence.
Do you think the Gavin family are happy with the result?
The Gavin family are happy not only for the sentence, but the fact that there's closure. It's closure from today, Paul, and they're happy to move on with their lives.
It's the first time you got that he's admitted to killing Declan Gavin. That's significant.
That's absolutely the truth, yeah. It's the first time that he put his hand up for the killing of Declan Gavin.
And actually talk to us about that, Paul, that apology from Brian Rattigan and how the court viewed it.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Rattigan, his plea essentially was the first time he admitted it. Before that, he had sat down in Garda interviews and told them, I won't admit it, yous prove it, that's your job. So it was significant that he completely changed and that he admitted that he was responsible for the death of Declan Gavin. And he also wrote a letter to Pauline Gavin, who's the victim's mother, saying that he regretted that night 18 years ago in silence ever since. However, the family, the mother, Mr. Gavin's mother, declined to read the letter when she received it, feeling that it was a little bit late, and the family also felt that it was too little too late, and the judge took that into consideration today when he was handing out the sentence. He said the apology had come too late to be a mitigating factor, and he sentenced Brian Rattigan to another 9 years in prison. And what's interesting and significant perhaps about the sentencing today is that it begins from the time of his guilty plea, the 1st of October last. Brian Rattigan was first arrested for this charge for the charge of murder in 2003. He has been in prison ever since. He was convicted of murder, but the murder conviction was overturned, and that's why
Their alliance allows them to save some 5.5 billion euros per year through their common platforms, purchasing and development. But their partnership is not an equal one. Renault holds 43% of Nissan, which enables it to vote on board decisions, while Nissan holds 15% of Renault. This distribution was decided when Nissan was weaker than Renault, but the Japanese carmaker has turned around the situation, producing more than the French brand, and its leaders want to review the deal.
Our business editor Stephen Carroll tackled this topic of Ghosn's departure along with other issues with Bruno Le Maire, that's France's finance minister, in Davos. That interview will be aired here on France 24 at 4:45 p.m. Thank you for watching.
In Sarajevo, at least 200 homeless migrants are trying to make it through a rough winter. Volunteers from a small NGO called Aid Brigade give them meals and help them warm up the squats where they found refuge. Rose Ikema is a coordinator.
Sarajevo can get minus 20 or even minus 30 degrees below zero. Most of the refugees here live in squats, often buildings that have been abandoned during the war or buildings that have never been finished, so simple cement structures without windows, doors, heating or weather. And we started insulating, closing off the windows and the doors, installing very simple wood burners. We are distributing firewood 3 times a week, so that all the squads have sufficient wood to keep their space warm at night.
These migrants are mainly from Pakistan, Afghanistan and Syria. Since it's extremely difficult to get asylum in Bosnia, most of them are hoping to reach the European Union by heading to Bosnia's border with Croatia, then hiking through the woods to Slovenia and finally to Italy. But it's a tough journey that can take up to 10 days.
Right now, there's plenty of people stuck in Bosnia who have tried multiple times, sometimes up to 30 times, to make it through Croatia and Slovenia into Italy, but who've been sent back 30 times. And they don't dare to cross right now because it's very dangerous with the snow and with the cold in the mountains. Sarajevo has experienced a siege just over 20 years ago, and many of the people who live here have been refugees themselves or know what it's like to fear for their lives. So in general, the response of local people has been heartwarming. There's one Bosnian grandma, as we call her, who is living in a house that's close to a ruin herself. She literally invited refugees to move in, and we installed a wood burner, and obviously we also made improvements in her house.
This fish is 100 years old. This is never coming back. This is bloody disgraceful.
Dead fish, hundreds of thousands of them, floating in Australia's Darling River. Locals posted photos and videos on social media to draw attention to an environmental crisis that they say is caused by huge mistakes on the part of the authorities. Observer Graham McCrabb regularly goes fishing on the river, but he's not fishing right now.
I'm on the Darling River at Menindee in outback New South Wales, Australia. We've had a second major fish kill in about 3 weeks. Up to 1 million fish have died. We've lost some iconic native fish and some really important breeding stock out of the river. You can have a look there. So basically what you're seeing there is we've killed hundreds of thousands of the native fish, and obviously there's the food chain for those fish in this river. So the ones that have survived are going to be an awful strife in the coming weeks and months because their food chain's been destroyed as well. Locals say the authorities drained lake water to be used for irrigation further downstream, turning the water stagnant. Coupled with a huge drought, it's had a devastating effect on the fish population. Here at Menindee, we have a magnificent lake system that was filled with 5 to 6 years' worth of water. Less than 2 years ago, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority drained those lakes on the pretext they thought it would rain, and we've had a massive drought through outback Australia, and we've just simply run out of water. The hot temperatures that we experienced out here in the mid-40s has caused massive algal blooms. As those algal blooms die, they take oxygen from the water. The fish are left with no oxygen and they die. It's just devastating. There's a lot of anger. Words just can't describe it. Photos don't do it justice. Until you're actually on the river and you're right amongst it and you've got the smell, there's no way to actually really understand the carnage that was here. Another reminder today to be careful of what you see on social networks. More and more advertisers are making ads that look like amateur videos. But then web users take the ads and modify them, pretending they really are amateur videos. Romain Margot Dufour, an ad executive here in Paris, has a couple of examples.
There's a well-known ad that's made to look like it's closed-circuit TV. You see a waitress in a bar clearing a table. Then she trips over a stool. Web users took the video out of its context. They kept the fall, but ended it there, so people would think it was a real amateur video. They cut off the end where you see it's just an ad. The ad was for a constipation medicine. It's a pun. Stool, causing you pain. Stool, as in bar stool, and stool as in, you get it. For the advertiser, it's a problem. Their ad has been doctored and taken out of context. You don't know it's an ad for medicine anymore. There's another ad that shows some soldiers playing with a chimpanzee. They end up giving him an AK-47. It's filmed in a handheld style. It's pretty convincing. It was in fact an ad for the film Rise of the Planet of the Apes. It was produced by 20th Century Fox. They didn't try to hide that it was an ad. You can see that it's clearly marked 20th Century Fox Research Library. But web users took the video and cut off the bottom. When you take it out of its context, it looks like a real amateur video.
That's it for this week. Remember, you can get in touch with us via Facebook, WhatsApp, and email. The details are right there on your screen. And please do visit our website for more stories from our worldwide network of France 24 observers.
We're born, we reproduce, we die, and our offspring will do it all over again. The good old cycle of life is at the core of our existence, our purpose on Earth. Luckily, we're no longer in the Stone Age. Social norms are changing, and being a parent has become more of a choice. Financial security, career development, and personal beliefs all come into play. But what about the environment? How does it enter the equation?
Having a child is a big commitment to the future and has a big, what we called carbon legacy. Each child that we choose to have, especially in countries like France that have rather high emissions, makes it a big commitment to the future of continued emissions over the long term.
That may seem obvious. A child born today will inevitably add CO2 to the atmosphere. But what may surprise you is that having a child may be one of the most carbon-intensive decisions you'll make in your life. Consider this. By avoiding a transatlantic flight, you can save up to 1.6 tons of CO2 a year. Living car-free, minus 2.4 tons. And then, on top of the list, having one fewer child, which can save as much as 58 tons of CO2 for each year of a parent's life. Think of all the food, nappies, laundry, toys, and the rest of the child's life as an adult. Some have taken this logic even further, foregoing parenthood as a conscious act to preserve the climate. They call themselves JINX, for Green Inclination No Kids.
My decision not to have children is linked to the environment, because I think to myself, in what world will they be born? What kind of planet will they inhabit? In the end, my choice was informed by many arguments related to the preservation of our planet. And as you grow up, you realize there's no plan B. We only have this planet.
So could going child-free really be the answer to our climate crisis? Some say it is morally questionable to equate reproduction rights with, let's say, selling your old car. But looking at the numbers, it is hard to deny the ecological footprint of a growing population. Until the early 1800s, there were 1 billion people on the planet. In just over 200 years, population shot to 7 billion. And now, we're expected to surpass 11 billion by the end of the century. During that time, greenhouse gas emissions grew massively. So with more people on this planet, environmentalists fear the Earth simply won't cope. Unless things change, we will need 3 Earths to provide for the resources we use. But the demographic argument remains controversial, as it tends to point the finger at poorer parts of the world with high fertility rates.
Industrialized countries are often saying to developing countries, what's the point of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions if you are unable to manage your demography? I think this is a false excuse, and I think it is unfair to ask developing countries to manage and control their demography, which is something that they have really little leverage on, whereas industrialized countries themselves are unable to fulfill the promise made under the Paris Agreement, are unable to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions.
Countries with a high fertility rate happen to be the ones with the smallest carbon footprint. Take a country like Tanzania, where women give birth to 7 children on average. Its emissions are 20 times lower than France. Advocates of population control don't rely on it. The problem, they say, is that as developing countries continue to grow, their habits will change and their carbon footprint increase.
You have 1 billion people on the planet who probably consume too much. Then you have 6 and soon 7 billion people who consume less, and we can't ask them to make an effort. We should take soft measures today so that in the future radical circumstances like war or the establishment of an oppressive regime will not force people to have 1 child or even no children at all to solve the problem.
So should we really be afraid of overpopulation? Our guest tells us more.
You can't ask a country like Germany with an average fertility rate of 1.5 births per woman or Spain with 1.3 births to have fewer children. They're already in a difficult position because of a declining population. This is posing a challenge with an aging workforce and migration. So in the long run, it's not a viable solution. In terms of CO2 emissions, children have a heavy carbon footprint when it comes to food, clothing and education. That being said, if you consider everyday consumption, Jinx will probably buy electronic appliances, will travel more since they don't have kids, and so by having fewer children, their CO2 emissions are likely to increase.
The debate shouldn't really be about how many kids we have, but how we live and consume on this planet. It is urgent that we start rethinking our energy system, the food that we eat, and how we move around. So instead of having no children at all, teaching our children to preserve their planet may be a more appropriate solution.
France 24. Every art form.
5 years ago, President Felix Houphouët-Boigny moved the capital city of Ivory Coast to Yamoussoukro, his native village. Huge construction sites were set up to transform the ancient village into a modern city. An international airport was built, a polytechnical institute, the presidential palace, and even one of the world's largest churches. But the planned transfer of institutions never happened, and very few people ever moved there. France 24 offers you a tour of the abandoned capital city.